My first question today basically asked about hardcore music. Was it the Americans that started first? Was it the British? The age-old question of who did it first. Now, one of the biggest problems with genres in music is that they're really heavily up for debate. There's really no fine lines on what is what. There's so many different incarnations and way to do the sound that it's hard to track the beginning of it, and there are few more difficult than hardcore music. Because it comes directly out of punk rock and it sits in this really weird space between punk and metal, you can really argue that any given band is kind of a combination of all three. Just think about it. Take a band like Bad Brains. A lot of people will say that that is absolutely, without a doubt, hardcore, but then you've got people who will say the same exact thing about it being punk. The same thing can happen for bands like the Butthole Surfers, Black Flag, Bad Religion. So many of those West Coast bands from the late 70s and early 80s are perfect examples of this idea. They pull from punk, they pull from metal, they pull from rock in general and blues, and they really don't fit in any category specifically. They can really exist in all of them. So with all that in mind, it's almost impossible to say who did it first unless you look back to where you see the significant changes. Most people will point to the band Middle Class, who had a single in '78 that a lot of people say is the beginning of the hardcore movement, therefore saying it began in the United States. Unless of course you're one of the people who consider the band Discharge, one of the greatest UK bands ever, who did things about a year earlier and had a similar sound. Some people might say they're a little bit more metal. On the other side of things, some people might say Middle Class are a bit more punk. It's really impossible to say what is what. This argument can go on forever, so pick your favorite and that'll be good enough for you. My next question asked me, what do I think is in store for the Red Hot Chili Peppers now that they've dumped Rick Rubin as the producer of their next record? This was a huge surprise for me because I think it's been something like 20 years since Rick Rubin wasn't the producer for a Chili Peppers record. And you can really make the case that he was a key part of that band getting as big as they were. Now basically one of two things happened. Either the band decided that it was Rick's fault, they've been making such mediocre music lately and they want to get back to a harder, heavier sound, or Rick decided he's tired of producing crappy albums for a band he knows can do a lot better. Either way, I think this is a really good thing. I've never been a fan of a band who uses the same producer time after time after time because you get into a bit of a rut or some sort of habit. Anyone who wants to breathe fresh life into the Chili Peppers is a friend of mine, and all we can do is wait and see. My last question today asked who my favorite artists from the 40s were and who I think is going to live on forever. Now, if they're still big now, I think it's safe to say that they're going to really stand the test of time. It's been more than half a decade, and I think you can make that argument. But I'm going to go ahead and answer this in reverse, because as you look at it over the decades, only about a dozen or so bands or singers really survive the test of time. While some of them will make it a couple years, when you get to that second revival about 30 years after, if you look at history, only about a dozen of them really get big again. Now the 40s are really special because you have the building blocks for almost every style of music that has happened since, and yes, that includes electronic music. But at the same time, I don't think a ton of these artists are going to achieve forever status, even though a lot of people want them to. It's more of a sentimental thing right now. You've got the big three in the 40s. You've got Sinatra, you've got Ella Fitzgerald, and you have Billie Holiday. Those are three names that will never go away, and with good reason. At the same time, I think you have Roy Rogers riding high in the 40s too. I'm not 100% on that, but I think my memory serves me right. In terms of voices, I think those are the four you're going to see even 100 years from now. I can't see people ever forgetting them or stop listening to their music. But beyond the voices, I really don't see that many other artists really sticking around for that sort of time. Yes, I know you have the beginning of jazz here and you have all of the important players, but I don't think all of them are going to be talked about 100 years from now. It's not that they're not deserving, but as you move further away, it's really only the big impact artists that stick around in people's minds. I hope I'm wrong because so much great music went on in the 40s, the 50s, and since then, and you don't want to think about your favorite artist of all time being forgotten. Now for me, when it comes to my favorite voices, it's Billie, it's Ella, and then it's everybody else miles and miles away. I'll take those two voices and you can have the whole rest of the decade. So those are my questions for this week. If you've got a music related question, go ahead and email it to me at thedailyguru@gmail.com. Hop down in the comments and let me know who you think the first hardcore band is, what you think of the Chili Peppers going forward without Rick Rubin, and hey, who are your favorite voices from the 40s? You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook right here, and I'll see you guys again next time.